a nucleus of a donor, and the dolly, the sheep, is a replica of the original donor, born on a surrogate mother. What they don't tell you is it took 277 failures along the way before they got one that worked. Cloning has become common. They now do it to monkeys, they do it to pigs and cattle, and it's widely practiced and great experimentation going on. And one of the mysteries is, why do they replicating cells differentiate? They don't know yet. Now, genetic engineering involves the manipulation of stem cells to produce desired tissues. And of course, nuclear transfer, being cloning, makes complete beings. And of course, there's huge moral, ethical, legal issues here. One of the questions that you're going to have to ponder somewhere along the way: can a cloned human being get saved? A big debate about that for lots of reasons. When does tampering with an embryo become murder? Is it acceptable to clone a baby to save a child's life? That was the moral dilemma the Colorado couple had to face. When does human life begin? A minister and a priest, Catholic priest, and a rabbi were arguing about this. And the minister said, "Oh, human life begins at birth." And the Catholic priest says, "You're really out of date. Human life begins at conception." The rabbi listened to them argue for a while. He says, "Both you guys are mixed up. Life begins when the dog dies and the kids are off to college." How will clones affect our society? If they're cloned human beings running around, will they be second-class citizens? Will they be a differentiated group? Daniel seems to think so. I'll come back to that. And can a human clone become saved? A lot of good theologians will have different points of view on that. And what are the prophetic implications? If this is coming on our society, has the Bible anticipated it? Absolutely. One other footnote: just a few days ago we learned that scientists in Los Angeles and Massachusetts now believe that they can coach an unfertilized egg to start mitosis and become an embryo. They've discovered that with the right electrical and chemical stimuli, they can coax an unfertilized egg into mitosis and produce an embryo-yielding stem cells. So they can make stem cells from an unfertilized egg. This was first discovered in sea urchins. They've been able to do it with limited success in mice. The embryos don't survive a long time so far until they find out why. But this could be an end run on some of the moral dilemmas, because you could argue that that's not really an embryo, it's not a fertilized egg. And maybe an acceptable source of stem cells for medical research. But let's talk a little bit about the dark side. Is this a panacea for mankind, or is it a Pandora's box we've opened? Now, let's not get reactionary. These guys are going against very, very serious objectives to try to find cures for AIDS, mental illness, autoimmune diseases, obesity, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, Huntington's, Lou Gehrig's disease, heart disease, and of course cancer. The leading cause of death after heart disease is cancer, 24%. 40% of Americans have already or will have cancer. 20% will die from it, 30% caused by smoking, 30% by poor diet and lack of exercise, spending too much time on speaking platforms. And there's also remedies being sought for things you and I can't even pronounce. And I won't go through this and embarrass my lack of background. Let's go on. One of the concerns is that there are very few safeguards against errors or abuse during the research. This research is not being done in controlled environments, not being done in government labs, not being done in large corporate facilities. It's done by garage startups all over the world. Thousands of companies being formed by the month, all over the world, not just in the US, to experiment in this area in a race for patents and insights. And as they start messing around with cross-species games, you're going to find that there's unknown diseases and complications emerging. And I use this little mouse as perhaps one of the more grotesque examples. The potential for self-replicating mutations are all impossible to fully anticipate. And of course, there's few procedural disciplines. There's small, intensely competitive laboratories and so forth. Very few controls. We're tampering with the human genome. Has this happened before? Yes. In Genesis 6. And also after that, Genesis 6 warns us with the Rephaim and so forth. The days of Noah that Jesus talks about, the days of Noah, or so shall the days of the coming of the Son of Man be. What were the days of Noah like? And what did Daniel mean when he talked about the miry clay? It's been there all along. I've never noticed it. In verse 43 of Daniel 2, we'll take a look at that. and what implications might have this for some of the strange goings on we see in Revelation and elsewhere. Genesis chapter 6, the first 2 verses are a single sentence. Everybody misses that. Genesis 6, verse 1 and 2 are a single sentence. And it came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the Benai Ha-Elohim, the sons of God, a term used exclusively for angels in the Old Testament, saw the daughters of men that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. Weird goings on. Notice these are the same sentence that avoids a lot of other errors. Benai Ha-Elohim, it is always used of angels, and it's in Job and other places. In the book of Enoch, which is useful for grammar and vocabulary of the period. The Septuagint, the translation of the Old Testament into the highly precise Greek, 3 centuries before Christ was born, clearly identifies this term as angels. A few verses later explains what the results were. There were Nephilim in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children unto them, the same became the mighty men which were of old, men of renown. I thought angels had no sex. That's not what the scripture says. It says the angels in heaven don't marry. It's a different statement altogether. I won't get into that here. We'll keep moving. The Nephilim, it comes from the word the fallen ones, from the verb nephal, to befall, to be cast down, to fall away, to desert. Nephilim are the fallen ones. These are the hybrids. This was Satan's strategy to corrupt the human race to prevent a Messiah. Yes, they were giants, but in the Septuagint, the word was translated gigantes, which is transliterated giants in the English. They were giants, but that's not what the word means. It means earthborn. In the Hebrew, in the Old Testament, we find a similar term called the Rephaim, sometimes translated giants in your English, sometimes translated dead. You might appropriately call them, if you look at all the verses and put it together, the living dead, strange creatures. Why did God tell Joshua to wipe out every man, woman, and child of certain tribes? Because they had a gene pool problem. One of the things that brought about the flood of Noah was a gene pool problem. In Genesis 6, verse 9, it tells us one of the distinctives of Noah was that he was a just man and he was perfect in his generations. And the word there is tamim, which means without blemish, sound, healthful, without spot, unimpaired. It's used of physical blemishes. And, well, we'll keep moving. Jesus, in his prophetic discourse, his confidential briefing to his 4 disciples in Matthew 24, said, "But as the days of Noah were, so shall the days of the coming of the Son of Man be." Now, what he may have meant is simply that it was business as usual until they entered the ark. Many scholars would see it that way. But others who have studied this carefully also feel he was saying something more than that. And so it's interesting that the classical view of Genesis 6, what's called the angel view, that these are fallen angels bent on mischief, was the view of all the ancient rabbis. It was the view of the early church up until the 5th century. But the 5th century emerges an alternative view because it was a little less spooky and a little more comfortable. It's called the lines of Seth. And that is the view that's taught in most seminaries today. The tragedy is it has absolutely no scriptural support. The fallen angel view is the view of the ancient scholars, Hebrew scholars, the view of the early church. It prevails among conservative scholarship today, and it's confirmed in the New Testament in Jude and 2 Peter. What's also interesting is that same concept is embodied in the ancient legends of virtually every ancient culture on the planet Earth. In Sumer, Assyria, Egypt, Incas, the Mayan, the Epic of Gilgamesh, Persia, Greece, India. The Greek Titans and all that are all echoes of the same kind of shenanigans way back in the mystery early chapters of Genesis. The Sioux Indians, we could go on and on. When you talk about Hercules or Atlas of the Greek mythology, you're talking about what the Hebrews would call Nephilim, the unnatural hybrids of this stuff. Now, let's just zip through this. I won't beat a dead horse here. The early church fathers held that view. Modern scholarship also holds that view. The Sethite view is easily shredded from the text. But what startled me when we researched this has, not only does it confirm the New Testament, you won't understand most of the passages in the Old Testament unless you really understand what I call the angel view. Things that happened after the flood and occur in prophecy. Satan has you can look at the Bible as Satan's strategies to corrupt the human line to prevent a Messiah. In Genesis 6, we've talked about, as God tells Abraham he's going to work through Abraham, now Satan can focus. When he tells Abraham his people return to Canaan in 400 years, Satan had 400 years to lay down a minefield. And whether you talk about the destruction of the male line at Exodus, whether you talk about